Now it's time to talk about the end of the road for Jordan White as the X-Men group editor. He's going to be editing, I guess, some Immortal Hulk, or I guess Incredible Hulk in 2024 and some Venom comic books. Makes me feel a little queasy because I am enjoying Incredible Hulk. But my hope is that Philip Kennedy Johnson is a good enough writer to overcome that to where he's not being influenced by Jordan White. And he had this interview with Adventures in Poor Taste that basically highlights why all this failed. Dan Buckley had to come down to Tom Brevoort personally and almost beg him to take the series. It's not like Tom Brevoort wanted to be the editor for X-Men, but he's coming aboard because Jordan White ruined this whole thing. And in this interview, mostly they're talking about poll results and the things that I guess Jordan White was really proud of. But there were a couple questions in there. Of course, they're absolute softballs trying to, well, basically verbally filleting the guy. But this is one of the questions. We were just talking about these two, but I feel like Mystique and Destiny being Nightcrawler's parents is the latest in a string of victories for longtime X fans in the Krakoan era. Rachel is now canonically queer. Mystique and Destiny are officially married. And now we have Nightcrawler's true origin finally revealed. How do these type of character changes work? This is what Mr. White said. In the X-Men Blue Origins example specifically, I believe it is something that Cy Spurrier brought up at some point, like, I really think we should consider this. I was very hesitant. Honestly, the main reason I was hesitant was because I feel like the jury is in on it. We know who his parents are now. We saw a story. It's not a very beloved story, but it's also a relatively definitive, given the way it was told. It seems pretty clear that it's true and decided. And there have been stories since then that followed up on it, and the ship had kind of sailed on that. I didn't know if it was worth trying to dig that up, but Kieran chimed in going, no, I think it's a good idea too. Here's why.
He did have the right instinct in saying, no, that's a bad idea. Look, it's bad enough that we already had the Draco. Of course, it's Cy Spurrier and Kieran fucking Gillen that bullies this pussy into actually digging up this terrible story and revisiting it again. I mean, look, and then doing it somehow fucking worse. That's the problem. And, we see what the Adventures in Poor Taste people are interested in. We see what Jordan White's interested in. And it's not telling good stories. It's not fixing bad things in the past. It's getting their fucking head canon put into actual canon. That's not the way to make a good story. And of course, it's just, we have to take this thing and take it for ourselves. That's all they fucking care about. And they wonder why the fucking Krakoan era is viewed terribly and just is basically killing any long-term interest there is in the X-Men. Congratulations. You did it.
Not only was he a poor leader because he couldn't develop talent, so many writers showed up in this X-Men office without the ability to tell a competent comic book story. And if they're gone by now, they're just as bad, if not worse, than when they arrived. The ones that are still there are just as bad as when they arrived. So no one ever got better. And then he never even taught anybody a valuable lesson of leadership that you have to stand your ground when you know something isn't going to work. And then this thing all fell apart because he ended up telling stories that just weren't good. They weren't interesting to X-Men fans. They were only interesting to the people in the X-Men Slack. And unfortunately, that's not the customers. Definitely confirming a lot of our suspicions. He also talked about the Adventures in Poor Taste X-Men poll winners. He said X-Men is the main book of the line, right? Immortal X-Men is a huge deal, but it's the politics book rather than the superhero book. And at the end of the day, the X-Men's roots are in superheroics, not politics. So it makes sense to me that X-Men would win the poll. X-Men Red is an amazing book that I love every single thing about, but also not exactly a traditional superhero book. A lot of world building and almost fantasy. I mean, it's definitely a little sci-fi because it's on another planet, but it's almost a fantasy novel. Yeah, it's just crazy when you build up a line of X-Men superhero comic books and you don't feature superheroics and heroism as the central focus point of the storytelling itself. It just kind of falls flat. It's not, what do you say? It's not brain science here. It's not rocket surgery. Like, this stuff is pretty easy to kind of predict once you go, you know what? We're not actually making X-Men comics that are X-Men comics anymore. I wonder why everybody left. And now they've brought in this like weird pseudo comic book audience that are like throwing a fit because they have to reboot the whole thing because the sales never showed up.
Well, that's because there aren't enough of those people that like pseudo comics that are basically nothing more than Orgy Island fanfic There aren't enough of those to sustain a commercial product. Why they're not just
a
telling
mainstream
them?
one, no.
No, honestly, they're not even there. It's not even big enough to sustain a vanity publishing indie type project, because that's all that this is. This is doing vanity publishing indie bullshit with mainstream superhero characters, and then wondering why they're only getting vanity publishing indie bullshit sales out of their mainstream superhero products, and then getting confused when the actual owner of the IP says, for a commercial product, it sure's not very fucking commercially viable anymore. Maybe we should go back to something that actually sold.
I love I think it's Emma Talks Comics or something like that. It was like, my 24th birthday, I became an X-Men fan. And before my 26th birthday is over, I'm going to drop the line. It's like, oh, you couldn't keep going? And these are the fans that they were courting.
Yeah.
They couldn't even stick through one change they didn't like.
The horror there would be if you had been reading for 30 or 35 or 40 years and they did something like this. Oh my God, it would be almost unbearable. But thankfully, we'll never have to see that. Fuck these people.
Now, he was also talking about the Exterminator series from Leah Williams. I'll be honest with you, Exterminators did not sell as well as I would hope it would. It's a total gonzo madness fest, but I love every second of it. And it's also a book that you just want to give to someone and say, hey, read a fun X-Men comic. They will enjoy it. I've given it to a couple of different people who aren't regular readers, one of them who was my wife. We got the trade paperback in, and I said to my wife, check this out. And she adored it and thought it was such a blast. He was greenlighting stuff that he thought would be successful, and it was clear to anybody that knew the X-Men line and knew who the creators were and knew who the frontline characters were going to be. Like, there was no viability to the titles. Like, how does this guy get to essentially like an executive type position where he's leading a team and making decisions on what kind of comic books they're going to publish if he doesn't even know who the fucking audience is?
Jordan White would be a useful person to have in an office, because he's that guy that every time he has an idea, you do the exact opposite, and you'll probably be fairly commercially successful. The problem is he didn't have somebody above him to force them to do the opposite. He just kept making the decisions. He got promoted well beyond his competency. Nobody was listening to him going, oh, Jordan's idea is to do A, we will do Z because it is the farthest thing from his idea. And then it suddenly becomes massively successful. Jordan is the anti-weatherman. Whatever he tells you is going to sell, you know it will do the opposite.
Yeah, so it's just what an enormous failure. He was also a poll about who is the most popular character. Shockingly, all the top characters that were voted in were female characters this year. Talking about Jean Grey, he said, Jean had a great year. I mean, I say that and she died, but she still had a great year because I think she had a really strong showing before that. She had a great showing at the Hellfire Gala right through her death, honestly, because she had a great moment in dying. Then again, the miniseries and her return have been really fascinating. No one cares about death during the Krakoan era. There's no stakes to that. When she died, we knew that she was going to come back immediately. People weren't talking about this being one of the best deaths in comics. People weren't talking about this being an amazing X-Men death like it ever had any stakes or gravitas or anything associated with it. X-Men fans didn't even acknowledge this.
I mean, first of all, it's Jean dying. Second of all, it's the Krakoan era. We have been so desensitized to giving a shit about it because you have X-Force that was literally slaughtering every character, every page, and bringing them back 2 panels later. Literally on the same page, they were getting resurrected and put back into the fight. An entire line of books built around death doesn't matter. And you expect us to give a shit about death. First of all, her showing at the Hellfire Gala, what the fuck is he even talking about? She didn't do anything. She stood there.
A secret to Firestar.
She told Firestar, hey, play pretend and be our mole. Talk to her paralyzed husband in an ambulance, and then she talked to Wolverine, and then she died. What the fuck is this idiot talking about? I am legitimately confused on what he thinks she did.
Well, I'm legitimately confused. You know, obviously, There are issues within the Krakoan era. But he clearly doesn't even understand the world which has been created around him on his own comic book line to where he thinks that dying is going to mean anything. Like, he clearly doesn't even understand the stakes in whatever it is that he's helped create at this point.
No, because look, as much as I want to give Jonathan Hickman shit, he was at least smart enough to understand that when you make death meaningless as a goal in your story so that that isn't used anymore, you actually have to have people in the office and that are writing the stories and that understand at a higher level, hey, we can't use death. And what did they do? Partially him, partially Jordan, staffed the office with nothing but a bunch of people that believe that the best, not the worst, manipulating of the audience tool out there is death. Death doesn't matter to us. It was set up for like that from the beginning. And none of these people have gotten smarter yet to find another way to manipulate the emotions of the reader, except for, well, I guess we could kill somebody. That worked in 1992. Stop it.
Yeah, this is the last thing we'll talk about. They were talking about like the best new characters. I guess Mother Righteous won that vote. And he said, when Cy introduced her in Legion of X, it was done in such a way that I think people weren't looking for who the Sinisters were yet. So she kind of snuck up and appeared more and more until we eventually revealed that she was the fourth Sinister. And then obviously Kieran has taken the reins with her since Legion of X ended and has done a ton of great work with her. I feel like both of them did a great job of capturing a different kind of voice for her. A very fun and fanciful, but still very threatening voice. There was a time when Mr. Sinister was an awesome threat, awesome character. Why are there fucking four of them? They even introduced like a villain in the very first issue of X-Men under Jerry Duggan that also ended up being a Sinister. And it's just so fucking played out. And there's nothing interesting. This could have been a cool character. There's a good design on the character. Meaningless because it's not even the real Sinister.
When Mother Righteous showed up in the beginning, most of us reading Way of X were like, who the fuck is this broad and why do we give a damn? She was an okay character design wrapped in the most cliched, bland nothingness there. There was just like a void of personality. Now, granted, that has a lot to do with Cy Spurrier and being unable to write anyone with any degree of personality. I mean, I guess she slipped under the radar of being another Sinister because people weren't looking for it, because people didn't want it. Nobody wanted four Sinisters. We wanted the real Sinister to come back. We were actually looking forward to two new villains, even though Dr. Stasis seemed interesting. Okay, cool. That was the one that had the chance of being something. From minute one, Mother Righteous was, oh God, will somebody just kill this bitch so she's out of my comic? Because she's adding nothing and she's doing nothing. She just exists.
Yeah, they did not successfully create any new villains. Like even Fei Long, I guess, is an Iron Man villain at this point.
In the first issue of X-Men, you ended up introducing Fei Long, who is just an Iron Man villain now. You had Dr. Stasis, who turns out to just be a variant on an existing villain. And then Cordyceps F. Jones that they killed already. You didn't add shit to the X-Men office. Nothing. Literally nothing was added to the X-Men mythos, the X-Men Rogues Gallery, or the X-Men office. So congratulations on a purple Iron Man villain. Great.
They made all the villains good guys, had them living in utopia with the X-Men, and they never were able to create new good villains. You know, you do have Nimrod out there, but I would almost credit Jonathan Hickman with all that. And Orcus doesn't even seem like a threat at this point. They say they're going to kill all the mutants, but I don't see him killing anybody.
First of all, I'm not giving Jonathan Hickman any credit for Nimrod. He was created, 45 years ago, 40 years ago, by Chris Claremont. They kind of gave him a slightly different personality, but it's really even not much of a different personality than when the Nimrod from the future ended up in the present and started pretending to be a construction worker. No, I'm not giving anybody credit. You literally created nothing here. You took away all of the villains, and there was zero additive to the X office. It was just subtraction. And it wasn't even addition by subtraction. It was just plain subtraction. Now, there was one other part of this article that I glommed onto that I think you're probably going to ignore. It was an incredible example of Jordan White's editorial style and never changing any fucking plans, regardless of how poorly received financially or commercially or critically everything was the fact that the Sabretooth thing with Victor Laval, what was designed to be 3 volumes, they did the first one and it sold okay. They did the second one and it sold terribly. So instead of scrapping the 3rd volume, they just forced Ben Percy to taxi ride Victor Laval through his 3rd volume and merge it into what Ben Percy was also doing on X-Men. So no, they were never going to change anything. This is all stupid, and Jordan White's stupid for letting it happen.
Absolutely, and he's been the downfall of X-Men during the Krakoan era. Thankfully, we are getting change. Is it good change? Not really sure. But Doc and I will be covering that extensively, obviously, through the year of 2024. We will be reviewing those first batch of X-Men comic books. We'll definitely be covering when we find out the creative teams. And we'll be talking about it right here on Patreon, on YouTube as well. Doc and I had the unfiltered version of this conversation, which will probably be about 15 to 20 minutes longer this week. We've also do an unfiltered review every week, and we do a Q&A every week. And if people have questions about all these changes or what's happening in the future, definitely do that one. But you do have to be a member of the Patreon, Doc.
You can ask us random questions about food or interior decorating or history or, whatever other thing that pops into your head. Maybe we don't have anything to say on it, but you can ask.
We always have something to say.
We always got something. We always have opinions, no matter what ridiculous thing it is.
Absolutely. So definitely check that out. There's a link in the video description.